Hello, welcome back. This is Conversation Artificial Intelligence. This is Paolo, your host. Today we're going to go into something very interesting. We're going to talk about artificial intelligence in quantum computing, artificial intelligence in robotics. And we're going to ask some interesting questions, like, for example, why people still use Google? And is there anything better out there in the market? Let me introduce you our host today, Michael Harries, who is currently a partner at the Robotics Home. Hello, Michael. How are you today?
I'm really well, Paolo. Thank you for having me on. It's great to be here.
The same here. Thank you so much for being here, and let's get into it. So, Michael, how did you get involved in AI? Tell us a little bit about this.
Gosh, how did I get involved in AI? So back in the day, I finished my undergraduate work, and I was very excited about AI. I've been reading Isaac Asimov, iRobot series and such like, and I thought I really wanted to spend some time and effort working out what it would take to have smart robots walking around in the world. So I went off and did a PhD in AI. Then I stepped away from it because it was really quiet in AI. I've come to Silicon Valley, and over the last decade, all of a sudden, AI has become the flavor of the moment again. And it's fantastic to be able to keep working on these things.
That's, for example, is happening in quantum computing as well. Like, I was working in that field as a physicist, and now there are startups all over the place. What do you think of that process of innovation?
That process of innovation, well, the things come and go. I think that's the way the world works. So either we have technological breakthroughs that bring things to the fore, and we've seen this with deep learning over the last decade or so, or we have markets that become ready to use some new technology. And I see that all the time in the venture capital business, where there's an existing capability that's been out there for a while, but no one's been ready to use it. Then all of a sudden something changes in the market, and people are saying, I need that. Bring that to me now.
Can you tell us, like, what are you seeing in the AI market? Let's say what it is that the general public can expect is happening in the next few years.
A lot of the way that we're thinking about AI today is tied up with this notion of deep learning, this model of gradient descent. And it's been incredibly powerful at solving particular sorts of problems. But AI is a really broad church. There's a lot of different things going on. And so part of the things that we're seeing are far more capable methods of doing natural language processing. We're seeing AI being used more and more across robotics. And so a lot of AI techniques around navigation, around vision and such like are driving this new generation of physical robots. And robotics really is, in a great many cases, it's applied AI. It's all about the software. One of the reasons I'm excited about what's going on with quantum computing is that it shifts what's possible in the world of AI. It's going to let us do operations that today are incredibly expensive, where I can get an answer, but I might need to wait 100 years. I should be able to get answers much more quickly. And that will shift, for example, the level to which we can use natural language processing. So those three areas I think are tremendously exciting.
So is there any chance that Google search could become obsolete because of the work of some of these startups that are working in this field?
Oh my gosh. Look, really, I think the reason that we have these big companies like Google and Facebook and Microsoft is that they're very, very good at focusing in on a particular problem, a massive business model. I don't see really any chance that they become obsolete because of the things that these other companies are doing. However, I do think that there's interesting potential for taking the things that they do and going further. Right? So there's areas where a Google-style search really doesn't work very well. Right? So if I'm in the enterprise and I have a corpus of documents that I'm trying to search through, Google-style search doesn't help me very much. There are methods out there that get closer to understanding what's actually in the content of the document, that have a greater sense of context, so they're able to identify relevant documents for my use.
Why is Google not helping so much in the context of documents?
What I'll say is that this is a very active area of research, right? And to be fair to Google, they've been really pushing the boundaries of what can be done. 5 years ago, the state of the art in natural language processing was something called bag of words. I can say, what are the words in this sentence or in this paragraph, and I'm going to do a vector model to be able to search on those. Now, what it didn't take account of is the order of words. They've now come through with something called BERT and some other technologies that really push what's been possible using gradient descent, using deep learning, to be able to say, let's look at the order in which these words occur. And it's really driven forward the field. However, these methods are still very hard to use. They're following one particular research thread, which is very, very popular at the moment, which is around sub-symbolic learning. There's other methods that I've been very excited about seeing around graph methods, modeling the structure of language, that let you do things with much smaller amounts of data and bring different capabilities.
As a scientist, for example, or as a business person, okay, if I go on Google right now and I say, I'm interested in companies in artificial intelligence, can you find 3 companies that have had stunning profit margins and they have 60% of their revenue coming from artificial intelligence? Can you find them, please? This Google will not find, because there is a complication of understanding what I'm asking. And then the answer is putting together lots of dots. So this requires a real intelligence for answering a question like this. What's out there, in your opinion, that could help people that have that kind of need? Like they have complex questions and they're looking for complex answers, actually.
So I've been involved with a company called Kindi along the way. I was fortunate enough to invest in them when I was running an accelerator for Citrix, and then to join them as CTO. They're fascinating in that they bring a range of these new capabilities to bear at a level that lets people ask questions of the corpus of documents or the corpus of materials, and then bring out fragments that are relevant to answer those, which I think is exactly the sorts of challenges you're talking about. So there are people who are pushing these things forward. Now, what's fascinating about them is, while we can talk about them as being part of a deep learning method, really they're marrying together the world of symbolic AI with the world of numeric methods, right? So deep learning and gradient descent. And that brings enormous power. And there's been a huge debate over the last while about why these things might be necessary, or why they wouldn't be necessary, according to various people in the community. But what I'm seeing is it makes a huge difference. It brings new capabilities to bear that we wouldn't otherwise have access to.
But let's give a sense of basically what's happening when we try to further innovate. So in a way, making these systems even more intelligent by using something that has already been developed. It's called deep learning. And then this symbolic AI. Maybe we can kind of flesh that out a little bit more for our audience.
When AI started, there was a core thesis that the way we would get smart methods, and indeed the way that a lot of these early game playing systems, or systems that play chess or whatever else, were put together was, I have a symbolic representation of the world. I can say, this item relates to that. Michael's father of Robert and Miranda and Artemisia, right? And so then I have a graph that explains something about the outside world. And then I can reason about them. So people were doing things like manipulating blocks, using these representations of language. A parallel thread was the world of what became deep learning, neural networks, where we were really saying, let's look at the types of things that people don't need to spend a lot of time thinking about, right? So the numeric methods that really could be turned into something that's what might be described as hill climbing. So those two worlds really have been parallel. And over the last while, we're hearing a huge amount from the deep learning side. And to the extent that for many people, AI equals deep learning. And that's a sad outcome, because there's many things where the combination of the two brings value. And there's certainly a lot of things where deep learning has been outrageously successful, doing the underlying capabilities of language understanding, translation, vision methods, and 100 other really fixed domains. We've reached a point where it becomes really important. In order to grow from there, we need to bring back in more structured representations of the world that are perhaps have arbitrary graph structures, things like knowledge bases, things like, what's the actual structure of language? How do these things fit together? And that brings enormous new levels of capability. And indeed, I'd use Kindi as an example of that, of a company that's been able to marry the two and bring some really interesting new capabilities to bear.
I'm seeing a lot of this more advanced artificial intelligence concept to be trying to be applied towards enterprise use cases. Can you reason a little bit around that? Why is that the case, and why it's likely to work in that way?
In general, enterprises have a large number of complicated problems, some of which are addressed today by the types of AI that's available, some of which are still hugely manual and can be improved upon. Advanced AI requires, in order, and actually speaking as a VC, if I'm saying I have a risk around this being a new type of AI, I want to minimize the risk of a new market. I want to minimize the cost of actually getting the thing sold. And the enterprise is a really easy way of being able to say, I can measure, if I can solve a problem that looks like this, I can identify these buyers and they'll be interested in working with me. So it's a lower risk way of going to market. That said, there's certainly really interesting work being done in AI by companies obviously like Facebook and Microsoft on their customer side, and Google, where they have advances in AI that are hitting the consumer, that are hitting the non-enterprise space. But for a startup, that's a higher risk story, right? I now need to work out how to get viral adoption of a new technology. Whereas in my practice, for the Robotics Hub, we're much more interested in companies that are doing B2B, that are selling to the enterprise or to the small business.
Let's switch then onto the robotic hubs. So what it is and what it does for the world.
So the Robotics Hub, we're an early stage VC. We take companies from early seed up to being a real organization. And so in the lingo we'd use in the space, we're doing seed through B round investment. And what that means is we like to find companies that have a foundational advance in AI, in robotics, advanced automation, and work out what it would take to take that advance, that technology, that IP to the market. Is there a viable business model? Is there something that we can make work with that particular entrepreneur, with that particular technology? What team would we need to build? What skills do we need to provide while the company is growing? And so, for example, we have companies that are doing bipedal walking robots, right? So Agility Robotics is one of ours. We have a company called Robotany that has a large-scale vertical farm, heavily automated. We have a company called Aerial Precision Medicine that's doing pancreatic medicine using some advanced AI technologies and gene sequencing. At the further extreme of that, I have a company called Blackbrain that is doing some really interesting early work on quantum computing. And that gets interesting because I believe that shifts what we can do with AI. So I guess we're marrying together things that feel to the outside world like it's science fiction with a deeply pragmatic view of the world, right? So what is it going to take for us to turn this into a business that has real revenue, right? And so this is the emerging edge of innovation. How do we make these things real? And how do we pick these companies that will make the world better? I'm hesitant to use the term impact investing. A great deal of our focus is on saying these are technologies that could be used for good or bad, and we'd really quite like to tip it towards the side of making a big difference to the world, helping us address things like housing and food and some of the challenges we have coming out of demographics, climate change, right? So how do we do things using less energy? So that's, in a nutshell, that's what we do at the Robotics Hub.
So when you look at the robotic areas and you're even merging this with quantum computing, what do you think is the economic paradigm? Is it like, for example, helping, expanding what humans can do? So what is in your opinion, your economic ultimate driver there?
I think it has to be expanding capacity. It's what are the new things that we couldn't do yesterday? Right now, there's obviously still going to be cases where we say, I could do this otherwise, but it makes a big difference. So, for example, if I talk about Robotany, also known as Fifth Season, they're growing leafy greens for sale into local supermarkets within a warehouse in the inner city. So there's no need to truck these vegetables across the country. It just transforms the model, like Clayton Christensen would have said, right? So this is disruptive innovation. So how do I change the things that we can do in a way that matters to people? There's absolutely still the case that from an enterprise perspective, This is about just reducing the cost of prediction. And a book that I often recommend people read from a basic understanding of the space is Prediction Machines. Basically saying, as an economist, you can view this as saying this is simply making it cheap to make decisions that otherwise would take a human being an hour. I can now do tens of thousands of forecasts in the same amount of time, right? So highly recommended that book. But then as we move towards physical automation that is reaching more and more of us, and indeed is hitting the manufacturing sector, we really bring to bear completely new capabilities, things that never have been possible before. So there's that side. And the intermediate point there is to say this is about augmenting people rather than replacing people. And one of the challenges that we have in the space is that it's very easy for shifts to be perceived as you're just going to get rid of this many people from this particular job. Well, some of that happens as a matter of course with innovation of any sort, but the power of AI, the power of robotics in a great many cases is to say, let's help people do more, be more capable, help the pathologist look at 100 sets of results in an hour rather than 3, help the truck driver continue driving it safely even if they're feeling a little bit tired. So there's a very real set of scenarios where the human needs to be in the loop. And one of the things that I think we'll see more and more of in AI is this situation where the human being is acting as a supervisor, is tuning and saying, hey, that's a corner case you don't know about. Let's first of all fix that, Mr. AI, and then add that as a training element so that we can improve the quality of what happens in future.
Let's see, can we visualize one specific situation that you're investing in robotics and maybe trying to understand the context? Like, what is the context? What is the opportunity, the change that we're trying to do, and what will be the impact?
Oh gosh. Okay, so to pick a single example, and it's so difficult because they're so different, right? And so one of the interesting things here is that as we're looking at advanced robotics, this is a completely horizontal set of technologies that hits in so many parts of our world. But the one that is probably easiest for people to get their head around, or indeed, the most fantastic of these, is the bipedal walking robot from Agility Robotics. This thing stands about 5 feet tall and it walks on 2 legs, is power efficient, has a relationship with Ford already for doing last 100 feet of delivery with their research groups. And the shift is, it's been very hard for people to build robots that can thrive in the human environment. So now we're able to say, here is something that is able to move around inside, up and down stairs in the environment, is the right height for picking things up, for moving them around, and is power efficient. And that has a plethora of applications. But the one that Ford is most interested in, well, there's 2 things that they've talked about. One being with package delivery, being able to take a package out of the back of the van and bring it up to the front steps. And then the second one is within the warehouse to be able to do the basic operations that today they need a human being for. For example, picking up a package from one level of conveyor belt and putting it on another conveyor belt. So there's a range of applications, and you can imagine probably 100 more. But the ones that get really interesting are where usually you have where you have a high risk of injury for people, and indeed where costs are deeply prohibitive, or it's very hard to recruit enough people to do the job.
Let's look at the technology for a second. You mentioned 3 things. So you said that the energy, this is agile, so agile robotics.
Yep.
You also mentioned that the energy consumption is low, and you mentioned that they're able to interact in the human environment. What technologies are enabling these 3 things, and why these 3 things are important?
So I think that there's a couple of things here. So one would be from the AI perspective. These systems are using computer vision, they're using navigation, they're using all of the advances that we have in cloud computing in order to be able to navigate, see the world, and work in the world. And there's some fantastic advances that have come out of the world of AI that let them move around. Then on the robotics side, these technologies are extraordinary, in part because they're really a big advance in what's possible with robotics. So this is biomimetic. Right, so the reason it's low energy, it's come out of decades of work by the founders looking at what does it take to build a walking robot, and how, for example, in this particular case, how do chickens walk? How do birds walk? And in particular, the example I keep using is a chicken, if you cut its head off, keeps running around for a while. There's not very much intelligence needed to do that walking. So what's fascinating is by copying that mechanism, and indeed this particular robot has backward knees in the same way that a bird has, it basically falls forward. It totters along, right? So very low energy needed for the computing, combined for moving and staying upright, combined with the power of today's software for navigation, makes a massive difference for what's possible.
When you make these investments and you look at companies like Ford that they want the last mile delivery, is it only the e-commerce space that wants that last mile delivery, or we can imagine a world that is even more than that? What can be delivered last mile besides e-commerce and food?
I think we can imagine a world where these devices are used to do a lot more than, in fact, and it's really the last 100 foot of delivery for these sorts of devices, right? So coming out of the truck and bringing it up, you could be delivering all sorts of things. You'd be using it in hospitals to move things around. You could be using it in the house as an assistant. I mean, there's 100 different directions. Now, the nature, though, of innovation, the nature of these new technologies is, I'm very wary about saying, here's what the world's going to look like, and I can build a beautiful sci-fi view of it. But I really want to be very pragmatic and say, okay, what are the near-term needs? Where are we having difficulty filling roles? Where are we having difficulty in our human world? Where is a company like Ford or any of the delivery companies likely to say, hey, we need to solve this problem? We have an issue. Let's focus in on that. We can imagine, I mean, really, one of the things that this particular company has been thinking about is they're a platform. And in fact, they've been working with a really broad range of research organizations around the world in order to say, build things on top of us. What else can be done? And some of those research organizations are looking at the nature of walking. Others are saying, maybe I can use this to go and do inspections in high-risk areas. So the range of applications for these things is really hard to forecast. What we know is this is a problem that people have been trying to solve as scientists, as roboticists, for many, many years because of the breadth of those applications.
So what is the solution there? Because that's the problem, where a lot of people have kind of a question mark is, but are we going too fast? Because now what we do with those jobs that are lost, because those people not necessarily are those people that can capture the new jobs that are going to be created.
So absolutely short term, there's a question there around how we address transitions for people. And that's an issue that's come up with every technological innovation over the history of mankind. One of the challenges with AI is that we hear that word and we think, oh my gosh, it's going to replace people. In most cases, and particularly with robotics, these things are very capable in particular areas, but really the things that we find very, very simple, they find very, very hard. We're not going to be saying just replace people immediately. Now, the flip side of that is we are going through a demographic shift globally. We have a very much aging society, and some countries are already there. So China and Japan are in a really interesting place. They need more automation. They have a huge workforce problem. The US will be there. Europe will be there. The rest of the world will be there. And there's some parts of the world where it's a much younger population, but the vast majority of the world has this shift occurring where we have a much greater age population. We need to plan for feeding everyone and looking after everyone when we have 50% of our populations retired.
Can you tell us in a few minutes why quantum computing and artificial intelligence are marrying, where they are marrying in the industrial world, if anywhere, and what will happen because of that wedding?
To be really brief, today, there's the merest slices of people starting to use quantum computing for materials discovery, right? And that's because it's a very nascent field. And that's because really the science behind building quantum computers, the physical hardware is not there. Now, that said, there's some fantastic work being done in the lab solving some problems in machine learning that until now have been intractable, or at least very expensive to work with. Now, this is not to say we can do infinitely parallel algorithms or anything like that, but there's a range of very specific algorithms that we can massively speed up. And so there's a lot of people talking about being able to use quantum computers in the same way that we use GPUs. So we offload particular types of operations to a GPU, and we'll do the same thing with quantum computers. And even today's quantum computers, which have challenges around noise and scale, appear to be able to be used in this way. To summarize that, some of the problems that get combinatorially painful to do today with machine learning, we will be able to address far more effectively with quantum computing. And they may be things like traveling salesman problems. They may be things like materials discovery. There may be things like drug discovery, logistics. But in the same way that we have with deep learning, this is not to say, hey, we can solve everything. It's to say there will be new sorts of solutions that we can bring to bear in particular verticals. And they will have huge impacts, but it's not magic.
So it's a fascinating world, at least for those who love innovation, for those who, is interested in science and technology and their applications in business as well. So with that said, Michael, I wanted to thank you so much for being here. I want to thank our audience today. If you have any question about this episode, please comment below and I'll be happy to answer. And if you have suggestions about topics, reach out to me personally. Michael, thank you so much. It was a pleasure having you here.
Thank you, Paolo. It's been a lot of fun.